Hello everyone, so second time recording this video and first video in a while I've recorded indoors. The cicadas are just too obnoxiously loud outside. So the bonus video for this week is going to be training one-handed swordsmanship, specifically early training and not wearing down your arms. So firstly, what do I mean by that and who is this for? This is for mostly my students because we have a messer order coming in, but it's for those of you that have either been doing longsword for a while and are looking to switch into or just try one-hand swordsmanship, or it's also someone who just has interest in single-handed swordsmanship and has never done it before. So firstly, probably the biggest thing that's going to stand out about this video is its thumbnail. That is a picture of a fencer, an Italian fencer by the name of, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but Agisialo Greco, who was from, I believe, the 1860s until the 1880s. And you'll notice that even though he is quite well muscled, one side is rather impressively overdeveloped. So something to understand is that development on one side or the other is always going to be a thing. You're never going to be completely even. Even with, for example, wrestlers who use their entire bodies, there are still going to be differences because we still favor one side or the other. That's just how humans are. I even have a rather obvious imbalance in regards to my forearms there. As you see, my right forearm is a little bit chunkier than my left forearm. Now, it doesn't do anything. Obviously, this side's a little more developed. I also write with this side. But it doesn't hurt me. It's just an aesthetic thing. Now, in regards to, your back, your shoulders, etc., then it can become a little more apparent. But that brings me well into my first point about training one-handed swordsmanship, which is, it's going to be really ironic coming from me, don't just train swords. What do you mean don't just train swords? I mean don't just train swords. Every historical master recommends that you also strengthen your whole body, right? Swordsmanship is an art, an extracurricular thing. If you're going to be doing it, you need to also be strong, okay? Now, it's not to say that you can't start if you are not physically fit. You certainly can. But very quickly, you're going to realize, oh, if I actually want to get anywhere in this, I need to start strengthening the rest of my body as well. If you just train swords, you're training very specific muscles, they're going to wear out because they're not supported by the rest of you. Some recommendations are wrestling, weightlifting, boxing, running, right? All these general sort of, there's vaulting horses recommended in quite a few Italian sources, as is casting the bar, which is basically hammer throw from the Scottish Games. It's just a big iron bar that you bring around your head and throw for distance. Things that require your whole body to move in conjunction, that are going to strengthen your trunk and your arms and your legs, etc. Okay? Find something that strengthens the rest of your body. Do it first, then pick up the sword. Right? And it's not to say that you have to, work out for X many months or whatever, and then you can pick up the sword. No, you can start learning from day one, but temper your expectations, right? Don't work too hard on things. So, for example, I'm going to just grab the most basic sword I could find, which is arming sword. Your first day, you should not be sparring. You should be working on very slow cutting patterns, very simple things that teach you how to cut and how to stand. Okay? Which brings me into my second point for not wearing down your arm, which is how you grip the sword, what you're gripping the sword with, and how you hold yourself. So, gripping the sword. I've already done a video on this before, but we'll go over it again. I am not all the way up here hammer fisting. I take my pinky, my ring finger, and my index finger, and I fold it in, right? I'm putting the pommel right there in the meat of my hand. My index finger is probably the loosest, but it is still active, and my thumb can either be on the spine or it can be next to it. You notice that my hand is on top of the sword, not to the side of the sword, okay? When the sword is in my hand like this, it's part of my arm. It's very comfortable for me to use, no problem whatsoever. When it's to the side, I'm only using half of my hand and I have to grip harder to hold onto it. So, with the sword properly gripped, what is now holding up these 3 or so pounds of weight? It's not my arm. Okay? If you stand hunch like this, you're holding it purely with one arm, right? That's going to start straining here, and it's going to start straining here. Probably the biggest thing that I see people do when they're new to this is they'll be trying to roll this guy out every once in a while. What's happening there is that they're gripping too tightly. You're feeling stress here, and all these guys are seizing up. So, what actually holds the sword up? Well, it's going to be your posture. Just like with two-handed sword, your posture matters quite a lot. So, depending upon the system you're doing, your posture may change, but I'm going to go over them and show some similarities, at least with the systems I know. So, let's start with Messer, right? Messer is a relatively upright posture, right? A little bit more of a narrow / walking stance. And I'm going to have my guard a little lower because of light. But what's holding the sword up at the moment, regardless of what position I take, is my trunk, right? My core is up, my lats are active, so the sword is pretty weightless at the moment, right? No matter what I do, it's all supported by here. The reason that is achieved is because I am rolling my shoulders back, I'm pulling my core up, and I'm letting this guy do the work, okay? If you're hunched down, closed off, then it's just going to be your arm, and very quickly that's going to wear down. So, how do I recommend training that? Well, firstly, any sort of wrestling or running or weightlifting is going to teach you very quickly you need to be standing upright. But another thing I would recommend is if you want to get into a single-hand sword system, one of the better ones, in my opinion, to start off with, not that you can't start off with others, but just my opinion, would be sword and buckler. Be it the Bolognese tradition or Lignitzer, doesn't really matter. What this forces you to do is I have to hold this buckler extended. At no point do I get to just put it here, right? I have to hold this extended and I have to hold this extended, which very quickly and naturally will teach my body to keep my shoulders back, right? So that way I can extend these weightlessly and use them in conjunction. So, if you are looking to get into a system and don't really have a pick of system yet, sword and buckler is honestly quite good for you. It also teaches a lot of hand-eye coordination. Your hands are doing different jobs, but they're working in conjunction with each other, and it will teach you to stand upright. So, that's my recommendation there. Sword and rotella is also good, but rotella is quite heavy. I will tell you that right now. So, bucklers are also a little more available. But, that's the basic of Messer, and sword and buckler to an extent. So let's talk about a different posture. Grab my side sword here. Let's talk a little bit about rapier. Now, I am someone who does the Italian tradition, so I'm going to take an Italian stance. However, if you do destrezza, it's still going to have the same general thing, so I will briefly touch on that. So, even if I'm in my back-weighted Italian-style stance, I am not holding up this with just my arm, okay? If I'm like this, then yes, that's my arm just holding it, right? I am bringing my hips back, I'm opening up my torso, and my lat is holding up my arm. I am also keeping a bend in my arm. I am not extending it out the whole time. That is going to lead to this guy giving out very quickly. It's just here, there's no pressure on my shoulder whatsoever, my hand is relaxed, my muscles are relaxed, everything is just suspended right now. It's very easy for me to move and extend, do whatever I'm going to do, right? You notice the similarity. It's all about the trunk, holding up the sword. Now, actually, let's talk about destrezza real quick. So destrezza has a different stance. I am not too versed in destrezza. I've read through Godinho and followed some advice of some Godinho friends, but they have a more upright posture, right? Here. Even then, even though my arm is more extended, I am holding it up with this, not with this, okay? If you let your shoulders shrunk, this sucks, right? Upright, fancy, fun. Honestly, the more you feel you look good doing it, probably the more on point you are. Now let's look at military saber. Again, upright, engaged, ready to extend that arm out regardless of what I'm doing. That's what we're looking for. Not this, certainly not this, not tucked either. Stack yourself up, Now my whole body is holding up this sword and it's light as a feather to me. Now, even if you do that posture right, you're going to very quickly find, okay, my arm is still getting tired pretty quickly. That's okay. Again, when you're first starting out, start slowly. Work on cutting, work on posture, work on understanding the basics of where you need to apply strength. One of the biggest things that affects people early on is the idea of winding with one hand, right? It's because you now need to keep an eye on where your core is in relation to that wind because you don't have your other hand there to cheat, if you will. You need to be learning all these things that will come in time that I'm not going to get into right now, but take it slow and absorb as much as you can. Don't try to jump into sparring. Don't try to, just rely on bad habits, and certainly don't train past the point that your arm hurts. If it starts to hurt, put the sword down, work on something else, right? So, that's some general recommendation. Let's talk a little bit about some other things that generally people ask me when it comes to training one-handed swordsmanship. What should your left hand be doing? Okay, so we're going to talk about the left hand twice. The first thing is, what should your left hand be doing, or your offhand, rather. Sorry, I should stop being so biased. What should your offhand be doing while you're training? Well, first and foremost, it should be doing something. You will see in sport fencing, both in the Olympic style and in HEMA, this. This is what I call lazy arm or floppy arm, and it comes about because all the focus is put onto this, right? And even a little bit here. The problem with this is that when you're going to start using historical weapons and not relying on speed, this is limiting what I'm doing, okay? It's not good form. It's not that you can't necessarily win on speed if you're like this, and certain tournaments have proven that for sure, but we're not here to just win tournaments, are we? We're here to embody the art and become more physically fit. At least that's what I'm here for. So we should be following their advice, and you do not see this. I mean, you do, but only very, very rarely. So, why is this not a great thing to do? Well, you'll notice with this arm hanging here, one, as I do actions, it's just hanging there. It is a target, right? If I get hit there, that's going to really suck. I could hit myself there. I have seen that happen. It's also not doing anything for me because what it's doing is it's rolling that shoulder ever so slightly forward because it's just limp, right? All my focus is on other things. That arm is limp and just hanging. It's not helping me balance-wise. I am practiced enough that I can do it, but I find it often throws newer people off. And it's also keeping my shoulders closed, okay? It's leading to this tendency to hunch on this side, which is not what we want when it comes to applying strength somewhere. So, what are some recommendations? Well, it depends upon your system, but for most people, I recommend just putting it on your hip. Right? Here opens up my chest. I can now apply energy and strength where I need to. It's helping my balance quite significantly. When I very first started out doing sport fencing, this is what I did. Sometimes if you are doing, for example, small sword or even rapier, you will see this funny looking position. This has a purpose. When it's here, I've opened up my chest and it becomes my counterweight for when I lunge, right? When I'm doing rapier, it's really weird to do with a saber. But anyway, when I'm doing rapier, my arm is up here because one, it's defending me if I mess up or helping me if I do succeed. Two, I cast it back or pull it back on my lunges, right? It's adding to my balance and it's opening my chest as I attack and apply that strength. If I'm doing mesa or something along those lines, it's here on my stomach or sometimes here on my chest because I'm going to employ it to grab, but I don't want it hanging out here. I don't want to be fighting like this, right? It just feels weird. I don't want to be fighting like this because my hand will get cut off, right? It's here so that way it can come out and grab something when I need it to. It is doing a job. And that's another reason I recommend training sword buckler, is it strengthens this arm and gets it used to doing things partially on its own. A good grapple comes up a lot in, well, not necessarily always a good grapple, but grapples come up a lot in one-handed swordsmanship because you've got that free arm. So train it, get used to it, make it your friend. Don't let it be a liability. And certainly don't make it just do nothing. Now, if you only have one arm, that obviously doesn't include. But so the last point that I want to make is, what about switching hands? So this comes from someone who is naturally ambidextrous. It runs in the family. Don't do it. Here's why. First off, remember, this is talking about beginners, people who are new to this. You are still learning a lot of other things, not just how to move the sword in a hand. You're learning about all the different lines of attack. You're learning about where to apply strength. You're learning about how to deal with their incoming applied strength. You're learning how to step, etc. There's a lot going on besides just swinging the sword. If you're switching back and forth, what's happening is your brain then has to make the switch to change things. So for example, military saber, Angelo system. 1 cut, 2 cut, 3 cut, 4 cut, 5, 6, 7, debatably 8, right? The manual says to do a 1 cut, right-handed, boom. Manual says to do a 1 cut. For a lefty, I have to now do my natural 2 cut, because that's what the play is going to lead into. You need to learn to switch things, and it can get way more complicated than that, right? For example, when it comes to Messer, you have the noggle, which is just on one side. That's going to save your bacon a lot of the time. You've got to learn to apply it in an entirely different place. Things of that nature are going to come up, and it's going to affect things. Because basically what that leads to is, you could argue, yes, I'm training both sides, right? I'm training this side for a bit. Oh, I'm getting tired. I'll train this side. What you're really doing is, I trained mentally and physically about half, and then I switched. So you got a half a day's training on both sides, rather than you could have gotten a full day's training mentally and on one side. And then later down the line, when you switch, all that mental stuff is still there, and you will have a greater understanding. Then it becomes just the physical side on this. So I would highly recommend, if you want to eventually learn defense with both hands, wait a couple years. Understand this first, then switch. Okay? And don't just exclusively switch. Right? I am someone who does trade hands. I trade hands in rapier. I trade hands in saber and backsword. Those are the systems that I'll switch hands in. The reason I do that is because, well, I've been training them for a very long time, and they're also the more simplistic systems. It's not that I can't do longsword left hand, it's just I don't need to, right? Because both hands are doing their own job. I've trained those for many, many years, and I switched after I really understood what was going on, right? When it comes to more complicated systems like Messer, especially, or Bolognese, or things like that, you're probably going to want to, or sword and buckler especially, you're just going to want to stick with your dominant side. Not saying you can't switch, but don't try to do it immediately. Okay? So, that's kind of generally all the advice I have for starting off training a one-handed sword system. So we'll review real quick. Number 1, train your whole body. Don't just do swords. Train your whole body so that way you are an able fencer in all regards. Number 2, make sure you are gripping the sword correctly, right? Make sure it's nice and supported. Your hand is on top of it, not to the side of it. Number 3, make sure your body, your posture is what's holding the sword up, not just your arm, right? Number 4, make sure your left arm, your offhand is doing something, right? It's never just hanging there. It's always active in one regard or another, because sometimes it can really make a difference. Those of you in my backsword class will recognize that one. But otherwise, though, that is the general advice I have for starting off training a one-handed sword system. If anyone has any questions, by all means, ask me. I'm happy to elaborate on any of these points. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and we'll go over some other things another time.